Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Scott Courlander, co-founder of Scorelander Games and designer of Batflip, the company's debut game. Batflip has already funded and can be found on Kickstarter. Scott, welcome to the binge. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, James. This is exciting.
It is great to have you. When I was reading your bio, I always get interested when I see the different places and backgrounds that people have coming into this industry, and yours was no different. I want to start by actually asking about this kind of theater background. So you had what was that? A whole background in theater?
Yeah. So out of college, I had gotten like real into like the improv scene in college. I was in a little improv troupe. We were called the Rubber Chickens. Yeah, we didn't name it. We inherited that name.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so like all of us were like real into comedy and improv, and a sort of a pack of us moved up to New York, and we all sort of dabbled in that world. I went to an acting conservatory called the New Actors Workshop, and so I was doing all that like real deep like method acty kind of stuff.
Wow.
And so I pursued that for a while. Then I moved back to Maryland, where I'm originally from. I met my wife, and we ran a theater company for a while. She's also an actress, or now she's a yoga teacher, but once upon a time. Yeah, our theater company was called Red Knight Productions, and I did some playwriting for us and some directing, and yeah, that was a big chunk of my life. And then kids came along, and I needed a steadier paycheck, so that sort of took a back seat.
So I guess the whole idea of starving artist is not a stretch. I guess it's a tough industry to get
Uh,
into, eh?
yeah, it's not lucrative. Not the board game design is particularly lucrative either, obviously.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it was a great creative outlet, and that's sort of what board game design has become for me in the present day. But yeah, I was doing plays in high school and all that stuff. So it was sort of a long time building. I got to the end of college, and I was good at school, but I just like there wasn't anything else at the time that I was really passionate about. So I sort of wrote it as long as I could.
Did you get anything on screen at all at any point, or?
So I mostly was doing stage work,
Okay.
uh, but I did pop up in a couple commercials here and there. I was in a commercial for Comedy Central.
Oh,
Did a couple other commercials. Actually, my wife and I met on set for a commercial for Weiss Market. I don't know if you're familiar. So it's a grocery chain,
no.
and that one was funny because there's this agency nearby that had brought in a bunch of actors, and the way they had billed it was each of them were told that they were going to be a featured actor in this particular commercial. And when we all showed up, and we're like, oh, we're basically all just extras.
Yeah.
And so everyone was like kind of like crabby and disappointed, because they all thought they were like, oh, this is my break, this is my commercial.
Yeah.
But I saw this cute blonde go by, and I was like, okay, well, I can handle this today, because I'll just follow that.
And then fast forward a couple kids later, and away you go.
Yeah,
Eh?
here we are.
And so then so you transitioned then into teaching, right? Like so now you're like a grade school teacher, right?
Yeah, I teach sixth grade English.
So then how did that
Yeah.
did you go back to school, or how did that transition work?
It was actually pretty hard, to be honest. So basically all actors have to have some sort of other more steady income,
Yeah.
because it's very boom or bust. And so what I did is I started substitute teaching, and it just felt very natural to me.
Mm.
Um, and I did spend some time working for a software company, and I did not care for that. So, I don't care for being a desk jockey, and so then I was like, yeah. So if I really want to have like like a real adult job, I like hanging out with the kids, and there's actually like a lot of connections between teaching and acting, and between theater and English.
Sure.
Both of them have to do with delving into texts and really understanding them, character and plot and story is just like fundamental to both. So it just sort of felt like a real easy thing to slide into. Uh, but it did take me a while to find a program that allowed me to get certified
Mm.
because I didn't have an education undergrad degree, and so I needed some way to become qualified for the job. And I eventually found what they call a career changer
Mm.
program, and pushed through that for about a year and a half.
I guess when you're teaching every day is a performance, technically, right?
It is. So many of the same skills apply, and just like when you're doing a play, you just have to do it over and over and over again. It's not just one performance; it's a whole slate of them. And it's the same thing. You teach the same lesson: first period, second period, third period,
Yeah.
and you get your script down, and your laugh lines and all that stuff.
And try to hold the
Um,
audience's attention too, right? Try to keep
oh
the
yeah, oh
audience
yeah,
engaged, right? I mean, school has got to be one
yeah.
of the toughest audiences out there, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. The difference is you can scold this audience whenever they don't pay attention. But
It,
yeah, they can be tough cookies sometimes. They're good kids at my school though.
and then you got pretty hardcore into was it
Fantasy baseball.
fantasy baseball, yeah, and a little bit of Magic the
Yeah.
Gathering I heard about too, or like
hmm Yeah. So I
talk to
mean,
me about that.
sure. So I've been a long time baseball fan, born and bred from Maryland, big Orioles fan, and I grew up on Cal Ripken,
Mm.
and so I specifically remember it was seventh grade, and my dad was telling me something about this thing called rotisserie baseball, which is fantasy baseball. And I remember my eyes just sort of bugging out of my head, being like, "Oh my gosh, that exists! You get to pick a team of real players and like
Yeah.
get points and stuff, and you win." Um, and that was just sort of an instant love affair for me. And so in one fashion or another, I've been playing fantasy baseball since then. And I mean, I think it definitely informed what ended up being my game, Bat Flip, which
Yeah.
is I just love finding ways to interact with baseball and to gamify it. And I'm in pretty deep now. I'm in leagues where we control minor leaguers. Everyone has a minor league system, and you have contracts and stuff. And
That's
um,
crazy.
yeah, and Magic was a little more sort of snuck up on me. So I remember it was at daycare, and I don't know, fourth grade or something, and I was still going to daycare after school. We'll call it an after school program, so it sounds less like I'm a baby. Um, but there were these two kids, these twins, named Marshall and Alexander. And I mean, they were kind of some weird kids. They would go around and just be like convinced. One said he was an orc all the time. The other said he was an elf, and they like stuck to that for like 3 or 4 years. Um, but they brought these cards in, these magic cards, Magic the Gathering cards, and I remember just like I had never seen anything like that before, and just like the combination of the art and the idea of like putting numbers on like their attack and their toughness, like it was just uh so new to me, and just like really scratched an itch, both for the I'm a sucker for fantasy, and then just sort of the game elements again. And I think both for fantasy and Magic, it's the idea of trying to take something and create a game that recreates the experience and attach a number to an ability, which is all like fundamental to gaming, obviously.
Sure.
But those are sort of my first tastes. And like I got some like some cards from whatever early Magic, and then messed around with them. I never really like made a big thing of it until my adulthood, and it was just sort of random. I was it was actually a baseball card shop scratching that itch, and I saw some Magic the Gathering cards in the back. I was like, oh man, like I remember those from being a kid. Yeah, I want to get some of those. That'll be nostalgic. And I just fell hard on it, and just obviously, as we all are victim to, so we
Yeah.
blew a bunch of money on it. And I didn't have a lot of people to play with, so a lot of it was just I would play with my roommate, and then I'd just be home brewing in my basement. And eventually I got up the courage to like, okay, I've made a little deck, I'm gonna take it out to the game shop and test it out. And so I did played some tournaments here and there, And for me, I love theme, and so like I would, it's part of the reason I'm not great at Magic is because I would want to build an elf deck as opposed to
Okay,
like just
gotcha.
building around a mechanic or whatever, or a knight deck or the zombie deck, real into tribal stuff. And so I built some good little decks, and I won some matches here and there, but I wasn't particularly good at it. But I did allow myself to sort of fall deep in love with it for a while.
How did the combination of your fantasy? I mean, I can kind of see the theme right here. We have, fantasy baseball league, and at the same time, you've got a passion towards Magic the Gathering and the history
Mhm.
behind that. I'm sure several other board games as well, but those two coming together seem like almost like an intersection point with your game, Batflip. Is that fair?
I think that's not only a great transition, but actually true. Uh, yeah, and so my dad's like a big baseball guy,
Yeah.
and I think sort of the germ of my game Bat Flip was like Christmas would come and I'd be like, oh man, like can you get me like a booster box of Throne of Eldraine, and uh and I for me, I sort of get the same satisfaction from building a deck and creatively finding those cards and characters that like work well together and have chemistry. Feels the same way to me as it does when I'm building a fantasy baseball team. When you're picking the players that go best together and figuring out how those numbers and
Hmm.
stuff combine. And I was frustrated because I really wanted to share that with my dad because we're pretty tight,
Yeah.
and but it was just like he could not get over the hump for whether it was the gaming part or like the high fantasy element of it. It was just like not his thing, and I was like, no, 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 but like it kind of is the same thing, uh, even if it's at like an abstract conceptual level. And it was very much the game was born out of sort of my attempt to say, okay, there are elements here that are really similar. How can I create something that would translate that for someone like him, so
Hmm.
they could enjoy a card game that feels like Magic the Gathering, but has this theme that's more familiar.
And then, so how did you come up with the name Bat Flip? Like when I think of Bat Flip, I'm thinking of 2015, Jose Bautista. I think it was like Game 5 of the American League Series, and I mean you got this what they called the epic, right? The Bat Flip heard
Hmm.
around the world.
Oh
For those
yeah,
watching right now, I've got up on the screen. I mean, I think he threw the bat like 20 feet in the air. It was
yeah.
front page of every newspaper. Was was that an influence, or how did you choose bat? Like obviously we know what the bat flip is, but how did you
Yeah.
choose that as the name of your game?
So it's funny how in the creative process one thing will inform another. So as the game exists now, there's actually like a really essential core mechanic called the bat flip,
Hmm.
where you're flipping a card over. But early on, I was just looking for like sort of like a hip, cool baseball term that would just be like a good name for a game.
Yeah.
And there's sort of this controversy in baseball about sort of like the old school, like put your head down, act like you've been there before types, the unwritten rules of the game, don't show people up. And then there's sort of like the new school kind of young hip let the kids play vibe,
Yeah.
where they like to flip the bat and have flair and show emotion. And so that was sort of on the tip of the conversation in baseball at the time. I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of like a hip name for a baseball game. And I the other alternate name, which is like really bad, was calling it card ball, which is about as generic as it gets. Sounds like hardball, I guess, and their cards, but like that's just like sounds like a cheap thing you'd get at
Yeah.
the dollar store or something. Uh, and but then once I had the name, that sort of created the creative germ for what ended up being like a really fundamental mechanic of the game, which is the bat flip, and which now just like is one of those sort of gifts of the subconscious, I guess.
Yeah. The I want to congratulate you for hitting. I think I'm gonna put this in Canadian dollars. Always sounds bigger, but over $18,000 on a $16,500 pledge. So you've already funded, right? You've already
Yeah.
funded. You still got 16 days to go. You got to just be on cloud nine.
Oh yeah, it was it was very stressful, and and it was a pretty steady climb for us. Then we hit it, but you just don't know if people are going to show for it, and you put in all the legwork ahead of time, but then you just don't know. But yeah, it's funny. I'm sure that this is true for most people who are in in creative fields. That a big part of it is like, oh yeah, it's great that oh my the company that I created will do well. But
Mhm.
more than anything, I'm just like really excited for people to enjoy the game and play the game. And I love watching people play it. I mean, I enjoy playing it too,
Yeah.
but there's something really satisfying to me about seeing other people enjoy something that I created, and that's sort of how I felt when I was playwriting. Is I enjoy, like, here's the lines, now you guys go play with them. Um, and for me anyway, the best part of funding is knowing that, yep, it's going to be a real thing, and hopefully some people will have fun with something I created.
So walk us through the basics of the game, and let me just start off by saying the team names you've picked are just awesome. Like the Juicers is hilarious, and the guys like all roided up. It's
Oh
awesome.
yeah.
So you call it the team shuffling baseball card
Mhm.
game. Walk us through kind of how the essence of how to play this game.
Sure. So it's a dueling card game, one on one, and what you're going to do is you're going to build a team and then play a quick 3 inning baseball game. The early versions were much longer, and we compressed it down
Yeah.
because it got long and boring. So you're going to play a 3 inning baseball game, and it's very much a I play a card, you play a card, I play a card, you play a card. You're responding instantly to the other person's choices. Um, the reason we call it the team shuffling baseball card game is so if you're familiar with Smash Up or other deck shuffling games, the base game comes with 7 teams,
Hmm.
and each team has its own theme and identity and mechanical flavor. All which are based on baseball things. So, like you were talking about the juicers, obviously,
Yeah.
and so like they're the steroid team, and so what they do is they pass the needle from guy to guy, and they buff each other up.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so what you do is you take 2 teams and you shuffle them together, and that creates sort of your custom team for that particular game. So just like if you're playing a game Smash Up, you might take dinosaurs and ninjas or whatever and smash them up and make
Yeah.
a deck. So that's your deck, and you start off with a 5 card
So
hand.
that's kind of where the
And
fantasy baseball kind of comes in, right? You're
sure.
actually almost drafting your players at the beginning of the game, right?
Yeah. Well, in early versions of the game, we had a much more elaborate team selection process and
Hmm.
drafting process. And because I do think that there's something to feeling ownership of the team that you created
Yeah.
that comes from creating it. And but what we found is that a lot of those drafting mechanisms just sort of distracted from what was actually the game, which was playing a game of baseball.
Hmm.
And so we thought that this sort of deck smashing mechanic was a great way to give you a sense of customization, but then boom, just get going and start playing the game. Uh, so both you and your opponent are have these 2 decks, and sort of the base number in the game is 4, and because there's 4 bases for home, first, second, third,
Hmm.
and then home again. And so the highest stat you'll have on any of your abilities is 4. And so the sort of the rhythm of the game is I'll play a hitter, and then you're going to play a defender against him.
Yeah.
And so if you have a hit of 4, for example, that would be a home run, 4 bases. But if a defender of 2 defends him, you're going to subtract 2 off of that, and it becomes a double.
Got it.
And then there's some other stats you can match up. So you can get if your batter has like a good eye at the plate, he can draw a walk against the opposing pitcher. If you've got a speedy hitter, you can, once he's on base, he can steal a base, and the opponent can try and use defense to try and stop them. But the core of the game is that hit against defense, and then utilizing the player abilities, because every single player card is unique, and they each have an ability that's themed with their team. And so a lot of the game is trying to figure out how to maximize your ability to score while making sure you don't burn out all the cards in your hand. The only way you draw cards in the game is whenever you record an out, both
Hmm.
people draw a card, and whenever run scores, both people draw a card.
So
And
I was just going to ask on the because on the card you've got like the same player can both bat as well as be outfield. Is that correct?
correct, correct.
Yeah. So you've got the four different spots on the same card, which I find interesting because I seem kind of. I think the assumption people might have coming in is that you got, I'm going to have outfielder cards as defense cards. I'm going to have batter cards. What I find kind of unique about this is you've got the player has all skill sets are on the same player card,
Hmm.
right? So you're using that player differently depending on, are they hitting? Are they out in the field? Are they trying to steal? Are they trying to block, right? Like these different functions
Hmm.
show up in different combinations, permutations on the different cards, which give certain characters, different strengths over others and so forth. Is that
Yeah.
fair? Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things that we were going for. Um, and so what that does is it gives you a lot of really interesting decision points, hopefully, where you've got a hitter in your hand and you're like, oh man, I really like his offensive ability,
Hmm.
but also he's got like a 4 on defense, so I might want to save him for next inning when I'm defending.
Yeah.
And so you have to just make all these choices about when's the best time to burn a card. Maybe I'll draw a card that's gonna, replace him anyway. Uh, and what's sort of unique about this game, and it's sort of a tough balancing act, is there are a lot of baseball games out there that are more of a simulation than ours is,
Yeah.
where like in this game there is no lineup. You don't have like an order to your batters and you just go through them over and over again. Instead, you're choosing the order that you play your cards, which when you're designing a game, you have to decide like how true do I want to be to the sport, and how true do I just want to be to the spirit of it and the feel of it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's got to play well, right?
and
And it's got to play
exactly.
dynamic, right? And if you're trying to
Hmm.
perfectly match the way baseball's played, that may not be a dynamic game nor a quick game.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, and so the game plays in about a half an hour, and
Yeah.
in early versions of it, like I was like, oh, it's baseball. We'll play 9 innings. I was like, oh my gosh, like so you're an hour and a half in, and you're in the
Yeah.
fifth inning, and you're like, oh man.
Yeah. This is actually like
Um,
baseball. You have there's different pledge levels, so I want to talk a little bit about. So there's one where, if I do I understand it correctly, you can get an additional four teams as one of your pledge levels.
Correct. Yeah. So there's a 4 team expansion. It's called the Bases Loaded expansion, and they're just completely integratable with the original base game teams, and basically it's just increasing the your choices when you're coming up with your combinations of teams. Yeah.
And then the triple you have, which is the boys and girls clubs. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's that all about?
Sure. And I want to call out another Kickstarter campaign. It was actually another sports game called Pickup.
Hmm.
It was a basketball card game, and they did this arrangement. I just thought it was just like such a great way to use the platform. So what that pledge level is you pledge I think it's $79,
Yep.
and then you get a copy of the game and you get a copy of the expansion. But then that also purchases a game that we will donate to the Boys and Girls Club of America. And we've got there are 5 centers that they have sort of in our area in Virginia, and so we're hoping to be able to send a few games to each of those centers, because I feel like gosh, just hanging out with these kids every day at school, like I see what a difference it makes just giving them outlets for their creativity and just safe places to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part uh, of what school is. That's sort of underrated because you've got standardized testing and everyone's talking about curriculum and stuff. But at its most fundamental, it's a safe place for kids to be,
Yeah.
and that's like a big part of the Boys and Girls Club mission is to give them a safe space. And so it's obviously a little thing, but it's a little thing that at least we can do to try and make a little difference if we can.
No, that's cool. And then there's two other pledge levels I thought were pretty cool. One is that you can name a character.
Hmm.
So is this a character that goes into all games, or is it just for your own copy?
It would be for all copies, so it'll be
Okay.
all the. sheer hundreds of people who are playing the game.
Is there any
We'll
limits
see
to
her.
that? Like, are we going to get into like a Bodie McBoatface situation again?
um, I think that the real limit is just family friendly. Uh, but I mean, there's silly names in the game already.
Yeah,
So if you want Spanky McTonguebath, like, well, maybe not that one, but
maybe not that one, but something
yeah,
similar.
but something silly, that's okay.
Yeah. And then you've also got this Grand Slam, so you can design a character. So how does that work? How does the design the character work?
Um, so that's designing a character from the artistic standpoint. The design stuff is still on me because the game's still got to work.
Yeah.
Uh, but what you'll do is you can send us a photograph of yourself or someone in your family or something, and then you'll just do a Google search of like baseball players in various poses. Send us a pose you think is
Oh,
interesting,
wow. Okay.
and we'll stick that face on that pose. You'll give it a name. You'll write the flavor text for the card. And actually, I have been going back and forth with. We do have one gentleman who's bid at that level, and his son used to play baseball. His, I guess, now adult son, and so he's creating a card of his son, so that he can have his son sit down with him, and they're going to play the game.
Oh,
And then
cool.
at one point, the kid's going to draw the card. I'm like, oh my god, it's me. Um, and he's promised to record it and send it to us. But yeah, so it gives you the opportunity if you want to put yourself in or someone that a family member, a friend, or if there's just like a silly idea you have for what would be a fun character to have in the game. It allows us to give the backers a sense of ownership and a sense that they contributed.
Oh, it's super cool. And then you also have an ability to do a completely custom team. I mean, it's a much higher pledge level, but you can actually
Mhm.
create two custom teams.
Yeah. So the essentially what that does is that allows someone, if they choose to buy out our stretch goal,
Hmm.
and then they will become the team owner of whatever that team is. And we have sort of a handful of teams that have been designed, but no art assets have been created for them, and no graphic design has been done for them. So if you do back at that level, then you basically get to do what I just described 12 times. Create the backstory and the look of 12 different characters. Choose the team colors. We'll work together to name the team as a whole. Um, and I'll sort of give you a menu of like, hey, we have this kind of team designed around this theme, this kind designed, whichever one you think would be fun to publish and stick these characters that you've created onto. That's your team. You bought it. You're the team owner,
No, that's
and then that
awesome.
will be part of the base game and go out to everybody.
So, what after this? Clearly you're a big sports fan.
Mhm.
Is there another sport you're working on, or what's kind of the next step for you guys?
So I think the next step for us is I think if this is a success, I'd love to get a couple more expansions out. We've got several team designs in the works that we would love to get into people's hands. Uh, but after that, people have asked us like, "Oh man, is there going to be like a basketball bat flip? Is there going to be a football bat flip?"
Ball flip.
And
Yeah.
yeah, whatever you call it, spike. I don't know. Um, but I'm definitely open to like playing around that space. For me, like the real love affair is baseball, and I mean I grew up playing all those sports, but sort of the next one on the back burner is since this game is sort of from the manager point of view, you're playing one game is the microcosm,
Hmm.
but I think that both from sort of like that fantasy baseball realm, but also just sort of the more Euro kind of game realm. There's interesting games where you sort of take a step back and it's building the team and playing the economics and sort of looking at that general manager point of view where you have a budget and you're putting it towards advertising or player development or spending on expensive free agents, and so I've got a little something
Like a
in
little
the
money
works on
ball.
that one. Yeah, and if it weren't copyrighted, I would use it, or trademark, I should say. Uh, but sort of very much that vantage point on baseball. And then I have, I'm sure, most game designers do. I've got a backlog of other stuff I've messed around with. Is a space 4X game and sort of a fantasy adventure game. I mean, and the reason I haven't sort of moved on with any of them is one, it just sort of like the space is so filled with that genre, and I just wasn't sure that this was the one that was going to add something new to the gestalt, if you will. And Bat Flip was the first one that was like, nope, there's really something here that's new and hasn't been sort of done to death. So that, I mean, that's probably our next big project. But I'm excited to see where the muses take me and take our team. Yeah.
So I put in the show notes a link to the Kickstarter campaign. If there's baseball fans out there, which I know there's millions, check out this Kickstarter. It is definitely very cool. If people want to follow along your journey, is there like a Facebook page they can follow, or?
Yeah, we've got a Facebook group. You just look up Bat Flip, the team shuffling card game, and you'll find us. You can also just check out our website. It's batflipgame.com.
That's awesome. Well, I just want to say that, I mean, you have funded, so I would say you have succeeded, right? So it's not if this is successful. I mean, this is successful, right? It's how much further beyond your goals you guys are going to go. So I want to congratulate you on that. It is an amazing achievement for your first game, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with next. If it's anything close to what you've created here, I think everyone's in for a treat. So all the best in 2022. Take care.
I appreciate it, James. Thanks so much for having me on.
Cheers. This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.